And I guess our first subject for today will be channeling.
Mhm.
And may I ask you, Tom, do you channel?
Uh, Generally, no. In other words,
Where do you? I guess you could interpret that two different ways.
yeah,
Do you channel entities that come through you for information, or are other human beings able to channel your energy?
right. First of all, as far as I am concerned, um, it might sound like a contradiction because from my near-death experience, I have, and I'll use the word channeled, information from total knowledge. You know, it's the Akashic records, the isness of the now, the existence of total knowledge always somewhere. So if I have retained any of that, even though in time I got it back then in 1978, right? And then from specific, and of course, since individuals are deceased, entities such as physicists and so on. In other words, I have on many occasions quoted exactly sentences that I have heard with my spiritual ears. Okay, but am I doing this now or tomorrow? The answer is no. I'm not channeling from any of those sources. That's regarding me personally. And yet, information, again, to use the word channel as in the dictionary, have I channeled this information from spiritual sources? And in that relationship, yes. So people have quoted me as saying, well, Tom got this information from Werner Heisenberg back in the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in that respect, I would even give into that could be considered a form of channeling. But now, realistically, the type of channeling that we're mostly interested in today in this conversation is that either from deceased entities or from entities that have never been embodied or incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many cautions that I want to, or a few cautions that I want to address right now for the general public, for anybody listening, and including addressing people who are claiming and or are actually channeling. As far as, are there very close friends and people around the earth, alive and well today, who are channeling me? In other words, am I allowing myself to be channeled? In other words, a receptivity on my part to love and to share in that way. And that therefore, are there people who are receptive enough or receptive in general to be willing or able to receive that which I channel? Generally, the answer is no. There are attachments, I don't know, that's not the best word, attachments, or shall I just say intimate awarenesses of me in several dream states. And by that, I mean several individuals who, while dreaming, normally dreaming in their sleep state, have been receptive subliminally, superliminally even, partially psychically even, because again, what is a dream state? No, it's a subconscious, mostly psychological working of the brain. Okay, and in those capacities, in other words, while people have been asleep in a sleep state, they have had my image appear to them in some of my conversations and so on, and their personalized awareness of my existence have come to them in a sleep state. That is not the same as channeling.
So you teach people on the dream level, even sometimes without your awareness, such as a lot of people think that Dan appears in their dreams and teaches them through the priesthood or whatever, not always at the time that he's aware. So that is valid. But as far as channeling through someone,
one of my understandings, I don't claim to be an expert on channeling at all because I haven't done it mechanically. And so many of the things that I might even represent, spiritually speaking, I don't do. They happen to me. Whoa, I can cover my ass on that. But seriously now, in channeling, I don't even claim to be an expert on the mechanics of it and so on. I've never seriously tried to do that. I don't think it would be good for me at all. I question mechanically if I were able to do that. There is a possibility of that, even a probability. I think that the trade-off is, personally, I am comfortable that I will either receive that which I need rather than to desire or even greedily or egotistically attach myself to any particular source and gain insights or knowledge or whatever from there. Several individuals, close friends from, in fact, really all around the world, so there are several who have intuitively or in a dream state gained a little joy or peace or bits and pieces of information from a sleep state. And a few people have, in a meditative state, a form of a pure meditation. I don't agree that this would take place, but I mean, an intensive meditation, this would not be possible. But in a meditative type state, again, my image or their desire for my image will have appeared to individuals. This has already happened and probably will happen in the near future. And that's okay. And as they desired this and that which I represent, it's okay for that to come to those people. But as far as claiming that that would be a channeling of Tom Sawyer, I would actually like to disclaim that type of thing. First of all, I don't think that I would be receptive to that. I mean, just the philosophy behind that, I wouldn't like that. Maybe I'm too selfish.
Looking into the future, which I know this is not an uncomfortable subject for you, in the time when you look forward to passing over into spirit.
What is the date? Today?
When you're no longer in a body and with us, Tom, which I know you'll be joyous at the time, although I'm not sure that's how we'll feel about it. I don't know if you can even answer this question. Will the essence or soul of Tom Sawyer be able to channel through anyone on the planet?
I will try to answer that. It might be an ambiguous answer. There would be the highest improbability of me from the other side channeling to and toward anybody at all, or even a group of individuals. The very highest improbability. And I'm saying it like that because not only is there always a possibility of anything, and it would be foolhardy for me to say that under no circumstances would I, Tom Sawyer, allow me to channel from the other side. No, realistically, I can even think of some examples, which no sense sharing them with you now. But the highest of improbabilities would be that this would either be allowed by me or that it would be facilitated, never mind cause and effect, that either permission is required or a duality receptivity, say from me to you and you being receptive and me being receptive, that type of thing. Because receptivity is usually the twofold, the duality, that there has to be an allowance for the source to share, and then the receptivity, mechanically the receptivity of the channeler. Did I say that right?
The right vibration to receive or whatever.
There's several other cautions too regarding that, and that again, because I want to touch on responsibility. If a person is channeling, and never mind to what intensity or how valid is it, a bona fide channeling situation of a particular entity or a group situation, group entities, or because see, sentences that I've said in the past in the early 80s, I made reference to the group. Now, in the last 11 years, there have been 3 the groups. In other words, I'll use that ambiguous phrase so that I don't identify particular individuals, but one of the groups was a group of physicists, all of whom had passed on. Now, what I was doing was using a title or a sentence saying that some of the physics that I have been received an influx of, a sudden awareness and influx of with explicit detail. Notice some formulas, some names, places, dates, things like that, including precognitions of sorts, because they required the basis of that which was discovered from the 30s up to the 60s. And in that group were such individuals such as Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein, several individuals. So ambiguously, no, I was not channeling from any one of them or exclusively this cliquish group. And yet I use the sentences that this information is from the group. All right, I just want to clarify that if in a book, I think that it might be in Heading Toward Omega, or at least the inference that some of that information has come from the group. Well, no, I was not channeling the group. But responsibility. If a person is channeling, first of all, I'll use the example that if the source of their channeling is from an entity that is nondescript and has never been embodied or incarnate. In other words, this is from Om Shleem and in the euphoric celestial body of, and I'm not being sarcastic. I'm saying those all ambiguous phrases that have never been documented in history before, and that this is my source. And I'm not being ambiguous, so I'll say la-di-da. So I am being a little sarcastic saying things like that. But now, toward the validity of that, somebody honestly, even thinking that they are doing this, rightfully so, or in other words, with thinking
with
that
the highest of intentions,
right,
loving.
with a great deal of efficacy. And, thank you. They, in the process of doing this, they have to understand that the perceptions and the knowledge of that entity, and I'll use the phrase entity, which, use your own phrase. If you call it the source or whatever the title is for the source of your channeling, that source is not usually based or grounded or from total knowledge. In other words, other than God or the light, not the light of this entity, the light, singularly, the entities may or may not have real information available to them. If they know a lot about this subject or that subject, or even if that source claims to be in touch with total knowledge, that's one of the catchphrases or ideas that you should immediately throw your caution flag up to. Because the only source that I am aware of that is in tune with, at one minute with total knowledge, is God or the light.
Right. So any entity, whether they're in a body or out of a body, could be inaccurate in their information.
Is probably inaccurate regarding certain information. In other words, they may very well be an expert on cooking or quantum physics or in other words, a spiritual path, a mechanical way of attaining this or that or the other thing. And I'm not taking that away from that source. But there is a tendency that I have noticed, and that has been brought to my attention, where individuals are channeling and are creating this image of my source is a Ramtha or an individual or a Zek or
right,
or any of those things. I don't mean to stereotype,
right,
but
right. But they assume that all the information is perfectly accurate. When, as I told you before, a friend of ours, dear friend Rose, once said, if you're a banana in a body, you're still a banana when you don't have a body.
Mm-hmm.
That perhaps, although they could, their heart, they have a heart, they could be in the right frame of mind to be trying to be helpful,
right.
And they could be very helpful, but they also could be deviant, or they could be inaccurate, or
yeah, no, it's just the realization that the source of the knowledge, and I'm emphasizing the word the, or their, THEIR, their source for their knowledge, in all probability, is not from the light. It may even stem from the light, but it is not the light. And that, like our human condition, no matter how hard we try, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
And no matter, like, I am, by the way, the best bulldozer operator in the world. I have made mistakes, believe it or not.
Right.
I mean, that type of thing. In other words,
So when
I could very well be the best bulldozer operator, but there will be mistakes made in the operation of the machine. If it be the inner reaction of me running the machine breaks down, or if the machine is doing its mechanical thing and I'm not in a good mood or whatever, I'm not receptive, there's going to be inaccuracies, and it's not perfection.
So it goes right back to whether you're taking a class in a classroom from a teacher, or whether you're sitting down over a cup of coffee with someone, or you're listening to someone channel. You have to listen to the information and see if it rings true for yourself, and not blindly believe everything you hear.
Oh, right. That's responsibility of the individual. And further than that, what I want to really advocate or yell out loud right now is the responsibility of the person doing the channeling to be aware of that.
Right.
Because a little bit of ego, a little bit of greed goes an awful long way in veiling your personal, my personal, or anybody who's channeling. The responsibility of reality, I'll say, in other words, for lack of a better word, of reality. And the reality is that there is a great possibility and even a probability of inaccuracies in any of this stuff.
Is it possible, I know that's what people are thinking when they're listening to a channeler, that the channeler is really able to put aside their ego personality self 100%.
Now,
So
I don't believe that. I'm saying believe because, as opposed to answering you, that can't happen, I'm saying that I don't know that as knowledge. And I mean, I would be very interested in seeing or hearing that or having it proved to me. I don't think that that's possible, because I know with the situations that have happened to me spiritually that there are characteristics of Tom Sawyer mixed in with that instantaneously. In other words, if it has to mechanically go through from the etherical or the spiritual into this physical body, the brain working out the mouth, the way you pronounce your S's is not the same as the next person.
Right.
And if you're talking about person or entities, that which the entity pronounces the S's is not the same as we might. So there's a translation, there is a distortion. The way of perceiving it, maybe a little bit healthier, is that there is always some degree of distortion. If it be in the fallibility of the English language, and that I say entity and she or he says another says the word source.
Yeah.
And what's in a word? And yet words are very important. Those fine details and can make a difference. Make a difference. I fervently believe that we individuals, for ourselves, that if we are going to a series of classes, in other words, a teaching system, any system, a series of classes or workshops, that which we need or that which we desire, or both, and hopefully they're the same, we will receive. And if you missed it this time, you'll usually get a second chance. Now it's, this lecture series is only going to be here this time. And you miss it because you can't afford it, or you didn't go, or you were in the hospital, or any of that. You will be given another chance. In other words, I really don't believe that which is spiritually a necessity, or spiritually by way of free will and desire of the individual, because that becomes important spiritually, even if it be formulated from the physical reality. There's the ego me, I wish to accomplish this, this, and this. And those goals can be from the physical environment and strictly the physical apparatus of my brain, and therefore intellectually I want to learn this or learn that. Okay, even if it be in that way, you will be provided with not only those opportunities, but the probability of enough information, the correct information, from more than one source. So regarding channeling, oftentimes a person uses the exclusiveness of their source, or I am the only channeler of Om Shleem. And, maybe I shouldn't say that phrase because that was a mantra given to somebody. So if I've offended anybody by saying that phrase, because you know how with tongue in cheek I say an Om Shanti, which means anything either psychic or spiritual,
Right.
and I say that with love in my heart,
Right.
and I don't mean to offend anybody with a similar sounding.
When you talk about doing your personal Om Shanti.
Yeah,
You're serious about it. Yeah.
Yeah, because that has a very serious side and equally a tongue-in-cheek, dry humor side.
Well, I think the fun thing about these interviews is that we always have our sense of humor.
Yeah, and hopefully that can be portrayed.
Yeah.
It's through us.
Yeah.
That
not to get too heavy.
again, there are some things in nature that are so serious that all you can do is laugh. Then you can go into Chinese proverbs that say, since everything is but an apparition, perfect in being what it is, having nothing to do with good or evil, acceptance or rejection, one may well burst out in laughter. And that's nice. Elaine still can't quite handle that.
Yeah. We have to do that.
I told her, when you are able to honestly laugh at that and with that little phrase, then you will have progressed.
Yeah.
And it's not saying that she is not progressing, not being able to laugh at that.
Right.
That's a beautiful part of that. So, no offense intended.
We're talking about responsibility. Why don't we get into the responsibility of teaching in general? Since a lot of our listeners and watchers are in the teaching area.
Are there any of us who are not?
That's true.
Again, what's in a phrase?
Yeah.
If you teach a class, that makes you a teacher. But if you smile at somebody, you're a teacher.
Right.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah. So when somebody comes to you, either in a general class situation or a one-on-one over coffee, and you're bubbling with all this information you'd like to teach them, where is your responsibility in unloading something on someone that they're not ready for?
That's one of the few difficult parts of Who Am I Today. It's difficult because I always want to share everything. My big mouth proves it. The longevity of some of my talks. I have a desire to share everything with everybody. And at times I say an uncontrollable desire. And that's not fair to say that of me because the attitude of an uncontrollable desire knows I really fervently want to tell everybody everything all at once. That sharing aspect of it. But now the responsibility of that should not and cannot happen. I'm not talking mechanically. I'm saying that it is really not fair. It is not spiritually correct. There are information that are sequential in their importance and their intensity. In other words, does a person have to have math to use quantum physics? Well, if they're going to do that as employment at a research center, yes, you have to have calculus and other things to speak the language, to do to key the computer keyboard and have it legible by other physicists. That commonality, that language. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. I just went to a research center. Totally interrupted myself. Wow. See, I told you I don't do that. It just happens to me. My goodness. Okay, bring me back on track, please.
We're talking about teaching someone and being sure that they're ready for the information that you're offering.
That which you can tell and teach a young child, you probably would not tell or teach the adult. And that which you refrain from the last couple of chapters because it's only a young child or a novice. That's a beautiful word, novice, because it's not offensive. And it can mean that you are ignorant. It can mean that you're just starting out on something that is very beautiful and very intensive. But if you're just starting out, you are a novice and you can't know the intensity. So how exciting are you to have read that first book? Or how excited are you to hear the first sentences of truth or spiritual reality? So yeah, we have a great deal of responsibility. I have so many good examples of things that I have been very, very physically frustrated and mentally frustrated that I had to say sentences, I had to teach things, I had to share information with, oh, groups, research centers, Ken Ring when he was writing his book. I mean, if you've read that book recently and you know me as well as you do, and you can kind of pick out sentences that are Tom Sawyer sentences. Well, in Heading Toward Omega, because I started thumbing through it recently, and there are many, many sentences that I flatly refuse Ken Ring to identify me with. So generally, when it says, another near-death experiencer said, that was, I wanted to share the information of that sentence, but I couldn't either identify myself as the source of that sentence or that information, or there were, there's the last two chapters of that information could not be told in 1982, so that by 1984, many people will have read it, and it would have spoiled, if you will, the essence of the chapter that was finalized and thank God was changed in 1988. And of course, I'm using an example that I know was in Heading Toward Omega of the nuclear detonation.
Right.
Now, I had knowledge of the two possibilities, I'll say for now two, the two possibilities of the outcome of that. If that nuclear detonation was to have taken place, it would have been as you could well imagine. And I mean, I don't want to go into the scenario because it didn't turn out to be that. And again, how fruitful is it to say what would the scenario have been? Plus, it would be too upsetting to me. So, as it did turn out, in fact, we collectively, I mean, mankind, not Tom Sawyer, not a small group of near-death experiencers who were so receptive and so on, were very instrumental in dealing with that. I know this, I don't want to make it on a small scale. On the collective scale, there was enough individuals, enough positive energy, enough love, enough manipulation. I mean, the special forces, the Marine special forces that did the mechanical part of it, if you will, and that was all necessary, and thank God it all took place. And history has been written much better because of it. So how much do you teach? Well, hopefully you teach enough to stimulate the desire for the last couple of chapters, to give enough truth to create validity and to, in effect, create truth. And that in your teaching, you always base it in truth. Now, if you give an analogy, say, this is an analogy.
Right.
And if you ever say the word I, then qualify it in saying, I this or I that, or I wish to portray. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, well, this happened to me, but let me exaggerate it to give you the point I'm trying to make. Be as honest as you can.
If somebody asks you a direct question, then sometimes you have to understand exactly what the question is, like the little boy that says, where did I come from? And the mother tells him all about birth, and he goes, oh, I thought I came from Chicago or something.
Yeah.
But once you're clear about what the question really is, and you have the answer, what I get upset with is when the teacher will say, well, you're not ready for that. But if you've asked the question, aren't you ready for the answer?
Yeah, that's a difficult trade-off. The different intensities and from the different sources that you individually are ready. Intellectually, you're ready. Physically, you're ready. How dare any teacher claim that he or she can see in you that you are not spiritually ready? That's a pretty harsh thing to claim.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that happens all of the time. I mean,
Right.
I have done that, thank God. And I have been able to see in someone that they are ready as far as they are concerned. And it may only be one aspect of their self, their etheric self, their spiritual self, their physical self, any one portion of it, one or more portions, that they are not ready. And I think generally it's wrong to simply say you're not ready for the answer. See, that leaves them hanging.
Right.
And I can think of a few circumstances where they need to be straightforward, blunt, and say that to an individual. And that, in effect, will stimulate their desire to learn more.
Right.
Rather than to just put them down. But often, maybe a majority of the times that that's said, and I'm guilty of having said that to a few people, that leaves them dejected. And that's not good teaching either. So even though I might have the greatest source in the world for the information, my teaching ability can be improved always. And that's a caution, a good point that you brought up. There's another aspect to that I want to say. Just repeat that part of the question. Others.
Okay. Someone asks you a question. Do you have the right or the responsibility to say you're not?
Yeah. Still ambiguous because as I was saying the other sentences, the point was so clear. If I have information and you have come to me, especially one-on-one or privately or intimately, in that intimate way, and have asked something, doesn't matter what, but have asked something, I have a responsibility to respond to you. I have a responsibility to try at my very best to measure your receptivity, your ability to appreciate. I mean, the dictionary definition, those made clear, made understood properly, to appreciate and comprehend and be able to handle the answer to the information. So to the best of my abilities, have those measurements of you are in fact ready, I have the knowledge that I have the answer to the question you're asking, and that I have a responsibility to answer you. I think people have a responsibility with information to share any form of information with anybody when it's suitable. So in that capacity, I then have to decide, as this is ongoing, as how and what I can portray, show, tell. And there's a lot of various responsibilities in there. We're talking about responsibility as a singular thing, and there are many different types of responsibilities as this is ongoing.
One of the teachers that I think stand out in my mind in the past that I've admired most are when they reach a point in their teaching that they don't have the answer and they are not egotistical so much as to pretend they do. To reach that point of saying, well, I don't know the answer to your question, but let's research it out, or let me find out and I'll get back to you, or whatever, instead of just sort of bluffing their way through or pretending that they're an authority on something.
Yeah, and again,
they really don't know that.
The problems arise through those most subtle degrees of ego. I'm afraid that a majority of the people that I know, the vast majority of the people, have very subtle degrees of ego, which I am guilty of. I mean, I have seen many of my own. Some of those things were addressed in the last 48 hours with my son Todd and the rest of my family. And I thought, wow, that is me. So this is something that everybody has. And it's a sad state of affairs when the individual decides, well, I should pacify my student, when the truth is they don't know the answer to the question. To be ignorant there's nothing wrong with ignorance at all. I mean, it's not even my opinion. It's a spiritual fact that in the human condition especially, you can't know everything all the time. I mean, again, that would be pure love, that would be pure light, it would spontaneously combust. But in fact, bear with me if I brag, I'm proud of myself for answering very bluntly a lot of times, I am probably one of the most ignorant people on that subject. Astrology, for one. In other words, the mechanics of astrology. I'm very ignorant on that subject. And yet I enjoy and listen to people asking questions of that. And of course, right away, I try to respond and answer correctly. So I can participate in it, but I first qualify myself as saying, I'm very ignorant of that subject. And then again, try. See, I qualified, or you should qualify where you're coming from and how intensively adept are you in this particular subject, or knows, how are you answering this? Are you answering this from you,
Right.
the intellectual, philosophical, spiritually educated you, or are you speaking intuitively / spiritually? In other words, do I consider myself a spiritual being? Yes. Do I answer things spontaneously spiritually? Yes, I do. I mean, I've done that a lot, and I'm anticipating doing that more.
Yeah. Are you aware, Tom, when you're talking,
Sometimes.
your human Tom Sawyer, or when you sort of clicked into?
Right. You might have to ask that question again, because let me answer it this way. The minute you said the second word of that statement, because I don't even know if it's a question right now or a statement, I knew exactly what you were asking, and I kind of started to smile, because see, the smile is my way of covering up my impatience, if you haven't noticed that.
Yeah.
And I want to just interrupt you and tell you, what's the sense of having me listen to the whole long drawn out question when I can just make you as happy as I can be by just saying sometimes and then answer it more properly. And I've conditioned, I'm not good at it yet, I've conditioned myself to wait and be patient and already know the answer to the question even though we haven't asked it. Well, now is that me being psychic or intuitive? No, because we're in a flowing conversation and everybody does that to a degree or another. And it's difficult for me to be quiet enough and wait and then 1, 2, 3, sometimes answer that and then go on with the long version of the answer. Even for me, do not just go right off on a tangent and give the 10-minute answer. I've conditioned myself and learned to say, well, let me answer you first, yes or no. Or let me say, well, it's a yes or no answer, and let me give you both sides, then I'll tell you the long version of the paradox. All right, now repeat the question if you can.
Okay. Are you aware of the times when you're speaking as Tom Sawyer, the human being, and when you're...
All right. See, I want to interrupt now. And sometimes in that, there are, I can't even give percentages, but let me guess at percentages. 30% of the time where I'm talking in a subject and then actual spiritual, intuitive information flashes into me or comes into me, and the words flow perfectly, and some people have claimed that they can hear that in my voice. In other words, they hear either I slow down and very slowly and say words like efficacy and things like that, or I'll speed up and just rattle off this information, and then I might even say, wow, that was interesting.
As if you were hearing it for the first time.
Right. And there's truths to that. In other words, that is spiritual intuition or spiritual knowledge. It is not in my intellect. It's not really in my brain per se. It's not in my intellect. I haven't learned it out of books. It's maybe come for the very first time into my realization, my conscious level, and then that comes out that way. I'm guessing at a number of, let's say, for the lack of a better number, 30% of the time. Times that situations like that happen. Other times, and one example that I'm thinking of right away was in Albany at an official lecture, was to be a 1-hour lecture, was a 3.5-hour lecture. It was a beautiful situation where I became intuitively aware of a suicide scenario in the audience. I was never during that time aware of the third, rather identical suicide scenario in the audience. I started with a singular realization. With my physical eyes, I saw the individual, and became aware of his situation. So seeing that, and with the way the conversation was flowing, there was a question regarding that. And as I was scanning the audience with my physical eyes, I saw this individual. Now, I should say, of course, I continued to scan. I didn't stop and stare. And as I answered the question, I did not look and talk directly to that individual. I mean, that's politeness, if nothing else. But then with his realization, Tom Sawyer, was talking to that man. So it was more comfortable for me. I was answering his situation. As that developed within a minute, less than a minute in time, and I talked for probably 20, 25 minutes answering that situation. Within a minute of that time, I became intuitively aware that there was another man, by the way, it doesn't matter male or female, but another person in the audience with a rather identical situation. After that lecture was over and we sort of convened to the parking lot where we talked for another half hour, a third couple came directly over to me and with accolades, thank you so much. And we knew that you were talking only to us. Well, right away I said, well, I appreciate what you're telling me, but I was not talking only to you.
Yeah.
And then I did explain that. As a matter of fact, I will share with just this smaller group that there were 2 other individuals who I was addressing intimately and personally. Although I know that when I do this, not only will the whole audience appreciate and understand what I'm talking about, but those individuals who are in the audience, then that becomes so absolutely intimate and personal, again, / spiritual, that they will receive that in that way. So that example says that I was initially intuitively aware of one individual. Within a sentence or two, became aware that there was another in the audience of about 350. And then not at all during that talk was I accomplishing, and I say I, what was I accomplishing, or were we accomplishing the effectiveness of that personalized, intimate, and spiritual talk for another intensive individual, as well as the entire 350 audience at large.
While we're on that subject, I know we haven't come to this before, but it's been so helpful for me. You have personally helped me in 2 situations where...
Be careful wearing tape.
I know. Where I was helping someone who was trying to stop someone from committing suicide. And I quoted directly what you suggested that I say to a person that contemplates suicide. And I think it would be really good on tape because the person that was helping, their instinct was to not stress the person out anymore by saying anything negative. But they wanted to say, I'm with you unconditionally, I love you unconditionally, whatever you decide to do, I'll still love you. And I know what you told me to say was a much harder line than that. I would never understand. Can you tell me or tell our audience if you're confronted with someone who's seriously contemplating suicide, what would you suggest basically?
Okay. Well, all right. And for right now, I'm a little bit caught off guard. I know as I'm thinking, I'm still stuck on the research organization. So
okay.
I'm
one of the situations was a teenager that had already tried once, and the other one was a call I had gotten that someone in the Midwest may have already tried suicide, and her best friend called me. And you had told me that you would say, I'll never understand. The pain will be much greater if you take the steps than anything that we could deal with if you stayed here in the body and you worked on whatever it is that's so tolerable. That you just don't give them any sense that the step of suicide is acceptable.
Yeah, is an option. Or will alleviate any of their real problems.
Right.
Right.
Or that they'll avoid
the understanding of that is, of course, with honesty, that you cannot understand fully anybody else's situation.
Right.
And then to tell them that you cannot understand. So often that word is just thrown out, oh, I understand.
Yeah.
And a person who is really hurting or is in a state of dis-ease is saying, do you understand? And they want the truth.
Yeah.
And they want you to say, well, I can understand a part of what you're going through. And then the best scenario is for a person to have the ability to associate a portion of their disease or dis-ease with something in their personal life. You can say, well, it's funny you should ask me that because I was so distraught one time, I thought of attempting suicide. And I found that it worked out for me. And it was, again, a direct association.
Yeah.
But in your case, this wasn't so, and it's still most important for you to say sentences, number one, that will not indicate that it is ever, ever, ever okay to do a suicide, to commit suicide, to accomplish a suicide. That number two, it will absolutely positively not solve anything. It will not make the family better off. It will not alleviate the person who is attempting suicide or considering it. It will not make that person better off, or it will not alleviate them the pain and suffering that they're obviously going through, if it be psychological or physical or whatever, the excuses or the desire to escape from that which they're desiring to escape from, they will not escape from that. That is not an answer. They're the two most important things. Along with, there is a way out of this. That if you allow yourself some time with effort, that it is answerable. That things will get better. I mean, say will, don't say can. I mean, be more specific. They will get better. And that you will love this person. That you do love them at the moment. They might be being obnoxious. You might be extremely uncomfortable. You might be wishing you were anywhere else but in that confrontation with what you are dealing with. Confronted by a person who is contemplating or attempting suicide. But you tell them that you care. You can tell them that this is upsetting to me to hear about this, but I want to tell you that I care, and I want you to be better off. And because I want you to be better off, minimize the logical deductive reasoning, because it started to sound like logical deductive reasoning. And usually, can I say usually? Yes. Usually, that a person in a suicide state or contemplating suicide has had enough of logical deductive reasoning, because for most people that use logical deductive reasoning, they've already got to their own personal therefore.
Right.
And therefore, their only answer is to stop, to die, to stop this, to cease this state of disease or disease. And that they can't tolerate this anymore. They have to do anything to get away from this.
Right.
And this is what is on their mind. And they have already come to the realization that therefore, there are no other options. So you might wish to give a very simplistic, I'm emphasizing simplistic option. Be careful as to what you predict or say. Should you tell them that in 2 weeks they will be better?
Yeah.
You can say that tomorrow will be better. But don't say cured.
Right.
And again, don't lie.
Right.
But give them some hope. Tell them that you care and that you love them. And if you say the word to a complete stranger, so to speak, because some people are still hung up in telling a complete stranger, and we look at it and say, I love you.
Yeah.
And mean it.
Yeah.
See, be careful about role play, because again, honesty is important. Or that you're not sure. In other words, are you really comfortable in using that sentence, I love you? I mean, if this jerk, and I'm not calling anybody who's contemplating suicide a jerk, but in your mind's eye, right then at that moment, you have this guy who is ugly, who is overweight, or too skinny, or anything like that, and you're not enjoying his physical appearance, how much can you say in a moment's notice, I love you?
Right.
You might be actually hung up on the disgusting appearance of this individual, or the disgusting odor of this individual, or this disgusting religion or philosophical view. These are all biases and prejudices of ours. But again, I'm using that as an example because say things either simplistically or ambiguously so you don't have to corner yourself into a lie.
Right. It makes me think of the Native American belief that if you save a life, then you're responsible for it for the rest of your life. Does it go through your mind that if you're, if this person says, okay, I won't commit suicide, what next? That It's your responsibility to help them with that next step and that next step.
That's something that anybody who hears that sentence right now and it rings a little bell, you should really delve into that. The American culture,
Right.
the American Indian culture, and that I like that. That's not bad, that's good. And possibly in a little more intimate discussion than a videotape, I could even address to a small group of people as opposed to a large group of people some of the spiritual implications that I know about regarding future responsibilities of that scenario where if you have saved a person's life from, in other words, it was assured that this person would have died, passed on, we'll say, if it be from a suicide or from an accident.
Right.
And if you share, love, heal, manipulate, or do, and prevent, I'll use that word, prevent or save, you can look at it two different ways, prevent or save a person from passing on. There are spiritual implications that go into the future. I don't want to really get into this right now. It's a very, intellectual or intensive subject because I would have to be very careful as to the sentences I use and what I say. But I can give examples, which I will not now.
One example that we won't get into that I know you experienced, but maybe we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, I mean, there are several that will give. If I give just the examples that I have mechanically been involved in, or physically reality. In other words, did I hold a man's head together with my hand? In other words, his skull, was it in 3 pieces on the street?
Yeah.
And did I physically put him back together and support the physical skull to the hospital, through the emergency, through the upstairs operation? And I mean, just again, covered with blood, all that mechanical stuff. Did I do that? Yes, I did. Did it work? It wasn't supposed to, in spite of my efforts. And God bless all the situation, it worked. Are there any spiritual connectednesses or future scenarios or implications of my relationship, my spiritual relationship with that particular person? And the answer is yes, there is. But don't worry about that. I mean, don't worry about that. That's not as big a deal as many people will attach themselves to or think of. In other words, God forbid anybody should hesitate saving a person's life because they would think in terms of, wait a minute, I don't want to take any responsibility for their future or for my future in relationship with this individual. And that would be terrible.
Right.
So, but there are implications. There is a degree of reality to that.
But no one comes into, well, I'm asking this, I'm not saying that. No one comes into their incarnation with a pre-planned suicide.
Oh, hold on. I see. I wasn't following you. I'm glad you said that. I thought you were going to say nobody comes into an incarnation with, for the purpose of, not the sole purpose, the only purpose of saving another person's life.
Yeah, that I can see. That would be
okay.
fun.
Right, but you mean come into this incarnation for the purpose of attempting or accomplishing a suicide as their karma. I can say publicly no, that is not fair, that is not accurate, because it's dealing with the fundamental, simplistic, positive, negative, good and evil thing. It is in the order of evil, bad, negative, sad, not progressive, all of those words and phrases to even think in terms and or accomplish a suicide in your life or in anybody's life. It is a good, glad, and wonderful thing to overcome. I mean, God forbid that any of us should get into a situation or whatever where we contemplate suicide. To overcome that is a very great accomplishment. I mean, God bless anybody who has been psychologically stressed, physically in a state of disease or have a disease and so on, and seriously consider suicide and overcome that dilemma. That is a very great accomplishment. That's better than becoming financially rich, because to become spiritually rich and something like that has much greater long-term value, much greater, needless to say. Something brief?
Yeah, just we definitely probably.
Sign language, we're almost out of tape.
Yeah, well, we just need to take a break. I guess we can back up.
Namaste.
Well, after that wonderful cup of tea and great
4 sandwiches.
angel cake from your angel Elaine, we're back again. And our next subject is about loving relationships.
I had one once. Yes.
Okay. In the work that we do, where we're all out talking about and trying to promote loving relationships between people, I think a lot of us run into having deep loving relationships with many people. And I think maybe you could address keeping a balance in your life if you have a family, a spouse, or when you have more than one loving relationship.
Yeah, one of the most difficult situations is to have a long-term relationship, if it be spousal or otherwise. And for instance, in my case, having had a near-death experience, for other people, a spontaneous spiritual awakening, or just a GSA, a gradual spiritual awakening. A few people, in fact, I dare say several people, who went to Sedona with us, have had or are having a gradual spiritual awakening. And by that I mean they were this person from high school and or college, and for the last 10 or 15 years, they have done this and that, the other thing, and they have a relationship or relationships which is ongoing. So they all fall in the same category that those of us with spouses, long-term relationships, and so on, have a situation where hello, Tad, welcome. We have new members in our audience. My son, Tad, who has come all the way from Germany, and my other son, Tim. Hi, Tim. We're talking about relationships. Lost my train of
We're
thought.
talking about the people in Sedona.
Right. And regardless of the really longevity of the relationship, or even the intimacy, or in other words, the degree of the relationship, how good, how bad, that type of thing, we have relationships. And as a person goes into or on or has suddenly a spiritual way of thinking or a spiritual change of any kind, you and I change from inside, and we suddenly know things. Now we know our attitude has changed. We know there is this thing called spirituality, and that there is a spiritual this or that or the other thing. So rather instantly, with that realization, even if it's over a period of time, for a gradual spiritual awakening, there is a realization that there are new needs, likes, dislikes, and a growth process, if it be suddenly or otherwise. In other words, we're not the same. Now, the problem with that it's usually in form of a problem, is that either the spouse, the friend, or the relationships, they have been ongoing. Normality, familiarity, and that which is usual, and shall I dare say the word normal, is the status quo. And then all of a sudden, this person starts talking either about God, or saying, I don't wish to argue with you anymore, or changing in some ways. Well, again, as changes, abrupt changes are usually chaotic, either in themselves or the result. This is kind of what I'm hinting toward right now.
It's like you come home and you're a different person from when you left, and your spouse said,
Yeah, and I don't mean to take sides, but
yeah,
the spouse is the same person as they were 3 days ago or 3 months ago, and you aren't. Now, generally what we're talking about is a greater or better realization. In other words, your reality has become activated with knowledge, even if it just be an attitudinal change, that's a form of knowledge of spirituality. Now, the relationship that you have with other people, there is, of course, the scenario where they are not receptive at all to anything new. They are not receptive to some of the spiritual borderline stuff, channeling, reincarnation, God. I mean, any and all of those things, and they very well be not receptive at all. And yet you're standing there knowing the reality of any and all of these subjects. That is usually traumatic. That is dramatic, to say the least, and often traumatic for spouses and friends and relationships, even if it be a business partner. Oftentimes, it's not nice, and it's chaotic. Again, the statistic that I've given in other talks is that intensive near-death experiencers who have been married for a period of time prior to the near-death experience, and that are married during that time, they will become separated and or divorced within 3 years. And it's like 90-some% of spouses. And I mean, that sounds very tragic, and it's certainly not absolutely delightful. But there are cause and effect relationships that can be considered and thought out sociologically, psychologically, and spiritually. One of the things that I usually say in a talk like this is just be aware of that. Now, for you people and myself who have had some type of a spiritual awakening and have been spiritually oriented in the last couple of years, be aware that casual friends, relatives, and so on are not aware of what's going on in your mind or in your soul or in your heart. And that if you are the rough, tough, rather macho Tom Sawyer who is steadfast and trustworthy and a very sexual being to my wife Elaine, but not only had I better never catch you kissing anybody else, I never will. And don't you ever expect that of me. And then all of a sudden, Tom is not only on national television, but in an audience of 300 people to 1,000 people, and hugging fervently all of those people. And I mean, hugging people that prior, through bias and prejudice and so on, I would never shake hands with. In other words, I would shun. I would say, it's really nice meeting you. That's okay, we'll shake hands later. Or just, no thank you, goodbye. And now I feel saddened to have to walk away from anybody, good or bad, tall or short, or anything like that, without a fervent hug. And I mean, does that make me better than anybody else? Well, it does in a way. In other words, it's much better to be more open and unconditional and be able to take delight in a good hug. But then we have situations where, and it's very typical of near-death experiences, including myself, where suddenly I am in love with everybody else. And I don't mean to say I do mean to say everybody else, meaning everybody. Now, that does not at all mean that my love, my intimacy, my lust, my intellectual partnership with my wife Elaine is decreased at all. There is no decrease. In fact, it was increased. My appreciation for her increased instantaneously. Now, how does that come out the next day? Well, the next day, in fact, I recall saying more fervently, I really do love you. As I was able to say that. It was the first additional realization. So it was a little better that way. Well, be careful of the idea that you're getting that, gee, Tom got better the next day. Because what did Elaine experience? Well, I said that so methodically, or when I did say that, it was either only lustful, it was, I really love you, let's go to bed. Or, I love you, can I have more money? It was very conditional. And she can't really see or know that I'm being more unconditional. And I'm actually using the word love, I mean the real word of love.
You had said at one time that many near-death or all near-death experiences come back experiencing more of a detached love. That, like you say, you love everybody equally and nobody really intensely.
There have been several that I know personally, a near-death experiencer, who came back and had a difficult time showing, telling, and participating in the love relationship with their spouse. And I mean all the different ways, including sexually, because it was so different that, I love you, I don't have to show you with hugs and kisses and as a sexual expression intimately and in that way. I can just love you from the other side of the room. And it might sound funny, it might sound wonderful to some people, it might sound terrible to other people. If you would have said that to me 3 or 4 years prior to my near-death experience, I would have said, wait a minute, the only thing that is free and clear is sex. And the only true expression of a spousal love is having sex and being able to love each other in that way. It's it doesn't cost money, it's free, it's available, it's without condition, meaning you don't need permission or all of those attitudes and so on that was typical and usual for me then. Now things are very different. Don't misunderstand me, both Elaine and I are still very sexual. Because I haven't become a priest that says celibacy is a wonderful thing. God forbid. And yet, at the same time, I'm joking about that because I can recognize, this is a tough thing for me to claim since I am sexual, that I can appreciate celibacy. I can't know unless I become celibate, and I'm not. So it's one of those things where, come on, knock it off. If you've never been that, don't claim it. But those I can at least appreciate compared to total denial of the possibility prior.
One of the other relationships that have blossomed around you with the thousands of people that you get to meet and handling the balance in your life of this is my wife, this is my family, and then having other women that feel close to you or you feel close to them. I mean, it's almost impossible not to have that happen when you're working in a situation with that a spouses love all the time, love one another and hug one another, and you go to these things like in Sedona where everybody's hugging each other, and people lose balance and focus.
Elaine once said, in fact, publicly once said, I get a kick at all of these near-death experiences who profess to come back with this new knowledge of love, and why don't they start in their own home? In other words, why don't they start with their spouse?
Right.
Well, a reason for that is why some cannot or some simply don't is a lack of receptivity. And I know that's, Elaine might not even want to hear that right now, but a lack of receptivity or realization that this can be enhanced upon or that this can be real. And they find it easier to meet a new person, a stranger, and just start off loving them unconditionally. And I don't necessarily mean sexually, but it can also include sexual implications, at least, for this moment of the conversation. Sexual implications and so on. And that if I have changed so much, is it not easier to go and move to a different city and start all over again? Because do I have to wait for the equivalent 10 or 15 years in time for my mother-in-law or my cousin to see me in this different light? I like that phrase. Or as this different personality, or as this new and improved version.
Draw to yourself those who are
in other words,
comfortable with you.
Did Tom hug you yesterday? Well, yes, when he said goodbye, he did hug me. Was there any different? Well, you don't know if Tom's kidding or not. See, that will be the bias, prejudice attitude that I have hugged my mother-in-law, for example, periodically since we met. It was on occasion. I get stuck doing it. Okay? Well, I mean, that's what it was like prior. Now, I really fervently enjoy doing that. I didn't really, from my side, I didn't really enjoy doing that. It wasn't really my desire. I did it because it was socially expected of me. Okay? And in that way, socially, I was forced to do it. Now, I do it automatically as an expression of love. I mean, do you see the major difference? And that, can she see or feel the difference? Well, she can, but she may not. Or maybe I said that reverse. She may, but she might not be able to. That's what I'm trying to say. She might not be able to feel or see the difference because she is so set in her bias image of, I've been this for 15 years, she might not be receptive to any degree of change. So it would require, typically it would require years or months or years of her suddenly realizing, gee, when I first met you, the first couple times we hugged when you said goodbye or this or that, I felt kind of cold or like, you're just my daughter's boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And now, gee, Tom, you're really a nice person. I'm keeping it of a positive nature. And there may or may not be that, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And that over expectations on the part of near-death experiencers and people who, like most of the people viewing this videotape, are trying and striving and wishing for and at least understanding that love is a better way than manipulation or any other thing, and that we're trying to focus on a more unconditional love. An additional problem is that the degree of intimacy. Now, intimacy I use in many different ways because I have the ability to be extremely intimate with anybody. Psychologically, enough said. In other words, one-on-one, the closest that I come to a reading of a person, the closest I come to being a person's not just casual friend, but shall I dare say something of a psychologist in nature and so on. And you can't do that accurately or fervently, as I wish to say, but accurately unless you're truly intimate with that person. And that doesn't mean being a superior subordinate role. It doesn't mean being the psychologist and this person's asking me for some counseling. It doesn't mean any conditional thing. It means that you are intimate enough to be equal with that person and delve into their persona or personality. And I mean, I have the ability to do that comfortably. I'm not saying that other people are not as comfortable as I am, but I have seen in many, many circumstances, as we all change toward this more unconditional love and positive attitude and striving for it, no matter how successful we are at it, there are situations where your mood, your degree of intimacy, your needs can be met in different and various ways. They can be met equal to your spouse. Now, I'm kind of steering away from and eliminating the lustful sexual part of this because I want to keep it, uniform and okay and socially acceptable for the moment as we develop in this conversation. And everything is okay. But then if you have somebody who is so normal and usual and knows who you are, your likes and dislikes, in other words, a spousal relationship, the degree of familiarity, and it's, well, I thought I told you this, instead of, did you recall that I told you this? Mm-hmm. See, you will treat a stranger nicer than you will treat your spouse, usually. In normal spousal conversations, I am 100% as guilty of doing this to my wife Elaine as she is of doing it to me and everybody else. In other words, how do you talk quickly to your spouse? Oh, did you get the stuff? Now, there's nothing really wrong with that, unless the mood is not that good. And then that's one more irritating demand. Or
if it were a stranger, you would have taken the time to say it a little
right.
more.
You might even said the same words, the same way, oh, did you get the stuff? But the reaction will be, oh, yes, I did. Is there something else you would like? Yeah. I mean, can you hear two spouses saying that after 15, 20 years of marriage? Or it doesn't matter the time, even if it be 6 months, saying, oh, yes, is there something else you would like? The more typical reaction is the abbreviated, yeah. That's all. That's enough said. Well, what do you mean? You know what I'm talking about. See, those things that can gradually become minor irritants. And you don't get that from new acquaintances. Now, here you are, all full of love, and you have new acquaintances who are new and refreshing and unconditional. And yet, do I love Elaine any more? Yes, I do more. Do I love her any less? No, not less at all. But it can be more satisfying to just have a sit-down conversation with a casual stranger than it is to have to go home and talk to Elaine about the phone bill.
Right, right.
I mean, all right, this sets a scene for the caution that we are not only vulnerable and can become victims of newfound loves, which unconditionally and spiritually and intimately can very, very easily become romantically and or sexually, and in that capacity, intimate or intimately. All right, so I mean, you see the difference, and I purposely reserve the romantic and sexual because some people have a difficult time differentiating the two, and there is a big difference. I have had romantic inclinations from newfound people in the last 10 years. I have had individuals who have fallen in love with me to one degree or the other romantically. Thank God, and I'm just saying this for myself and my circumstances, thank God I was able to recognize that exactly as it was. And I will claim, I don't really know if Elaine will agree with it, I will claim that I have never found myself out of control, meaning like an oh my God situation, like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was this. As that developed in a couple of occasions, a few occasions, I was able to see that as it developed. On one occasion in particular, I came home and shared with Elaine that this person, I love this person unconditionally. This person is working with me currently, and it is a good relationship. Please don't be afraid of if you notice a romantic inclination, that I am aware of this already, and that I won't become a victim of that. I mean, see, there's the problem, because how can I ever tell that to Elaine? Elaine loves me, but she has been vulnerable. I have been vulnerable. Everybody has become vulnerable, usually. I mean, I can't think of any exception. And that you know how something like that can suddenly become a realization. In other words, it can creep up on you, sneak up on you. So even though I was telling Elaine ahead of time that I was aware of this and that not to worry, well, anybody who is a spouse or an intimate relationship has a tendency to worry and cannot fully understand. Well, they can't know what takes place. Now, again, I want to also include other scenarios that you're not suddenly a victim of a romantic inclination or lustful sex or that kind of intimacy.
Or even a truly loving relationship.
Right.
You can't have multiple truly deep loving relationships unless you have
Exactly.
a harem or something. I mean,
If among my new needs have been an unconditional type of intimacy intellectually, psychologically, /spiritually, no, spiritually into any of those things, or just the fundamental psychological needs of my wife has a tendency to hug me once every other day. And I actually have a desire and a need to be hugged 10 times a day. Yeah, I'm exaggerating on purpose. 10 times a day. If I find that I can receive that, okay, in other words, this is even socially acceptable, okay, by being at John's house or Alice's house. But see, I'm also including, in fact, one of the last comments you made, and you referred to me saying another woman. I'm talking about something that goes beyond all the socially acceptable or usual or normal and all that sort of stuff. Because this is a situation where I have the ability to love a person for a person. And if they're green or blue, if they're, male or female or in between or both. I mean, well, and see, we smile right away, but I have met somebody who is both.
Right.
I have hugged homosexuals, self-proclaimed homosexuals, self-proclaimed lesbians, and everything else. And I could not have done that prior to my near-death experience. I would not have done that. I bordered on the person who would actually physically abuse somebody only because of their difference, either socially or sexually. And so in other words, I've changed that way. If I can receive this delightful need, even if only be the new psychological needs that I either know about or don't know, but knows it can be a conscious need or a subconscious need of 10 hugs a day compared to one hug every other day, I might very well find myself purposely loving a little more of this type of a relationship outside my household, meaning away from, in this case,
So you accept what you're normally given through the marriage or through the relationship,
Well,
and then meet your new need elsewhere without feeling that it's a threat to the relationship.
I'm not sure if this is the best example, but I'm stating here also that it is okay for me to supply those needs, in other words, take delight and supply those needs of hugs from many people, and not just rely on my needs being supplied by my wife Elaine.
Right.
See, if I hug 1,000 people, I might only have need for 3. That's what I receive back. Now, is I need the equivalent of 3 hugs, and I get 300 hugs in one day. I might still have accomplished the need for the 3 hugs, and let's say Elaine didn't hug me at all that day, or she supplied one of those hugs. And I don't know if this is the best example, but you can work this into other needs. The problem with that is the difference between needs and what you can socially acceptably take delight in. Right? Now, if I supply those needs through other people, strangers, if you will, there's nothing wrong with that, spiritually speaking, and depending on your social background and cultural conditioning, it may or may not be acceptably socially and culturally. Now, if you're a very strict this or that or the other thing, if you have an ethnic background or religious background, that enters into it. And that is your measurements, may not be mine. But in a spousal relationship, there is a basic understanding of that which is socially and sexually acceptable. I mean, as an example, for instance, I disagree with lip kissing with the general public. I don't do that. And I will actually stop and prevent that from happening in a public forum. It has nothing to do with social, really. It has nothing to do with spiritual so much. It has to do with my understanding and perception of hygiene. In other words, that is a sexual thing, even if it not be intended. See, it can be perpetrated and mechanically done as a spiritual gift. I mean, some Italians are famous for that. Some, in other words, ethnic and cultural backgrounds are famous for that you should kiss on either cheek. That's acceptable. But again, lips on lips, you have saliva exchange and so on. That can be sexual and hygienically incorrect. So that is one of those borderline situations with me, Tom Sawyer. Hugs, I don't care if you're clean, neat, dirty, or large or small or whatever, a hug is a hug. If you can't reach around, well, you hugged halfway. If you can reach around twice and grab your elbows, that's fine too. And that's acceptable. And then that can just be dealt with psychologically and spiritually, and is usually perfectly okay. So we each have our borderline situations where what is acceptable and what isn't. As we develop spiritually, those borderlines don't become totally disintegrated, but they waver. And I'm not saying that you're simply giving into more lustful or more greedy or more needs or more desires. No, I'm saying that they dissolve by the company you're in. In other words, can I hug Dr. Kenneth Ring as fervently as I can hug a woman child abuser? If I know she's a child abuser, psychologically, I might have a slight little frigid type hang up. I mean, I will do it, but there will be that little spiritual sensation in other words, that I am giving to her. And if she is receptive enough, she will be able to pick up that, maybe not quite the full wonderful vibrations, and she might be able to pick up that little negative vibration that I'm thinking of, one of her inadequacies by my judgment. In other words, my judgment that she is a child abuser, and I don't like that, and I want that to stop or change. So as I hug her, there will be a difference in that hug. Not so much in the fervency generally, but there'll be that little aspect. You can't deny some of your biases and prejudices and judgments. So that's all in a hug, because you're in each other's space. You are doing that vibrational thing. I have a tendency to measure with the palms of my hands. In other words, when I'm hugging, I have a tendency to open my fingers, for instance, as opposed to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in different ways, I mean, the subtle differences. I have a tendency to measure through my hands. In other words, can I see through my hands? I don't want to get too kooky about it, but how we experience that. Some people can just have their heart chakra in the center of them, having nothing to do with the surface or the sweater or whatever it is. While they're hugging somebody they're closer, it's not really that. If they're within each other's space, it can even be 5 or 6 feet away. And there's not much difference between that and very close. Some people require the physical touch, skin on skin, if you will. For instance, if they hug and it's wintertime, they're fully clothed, some people will not be satisfied with that, spiritually speaking, and as they separate, they will purposely grab the person's hand. I've done that. In other words, I wasn't satisfied with just the hug, and I dare say, I needed to have my hand or my fingers on their hand or elbow, or if it's a little girl, I might touch the top of their head or something like that. All those different things that we may or may not be aware of, but that are measurements. I went way off on a tangent regarding the mechanics of this. But did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say, going back to you saying that you probably treat a stranger better than you treat your spouse. I think a lot of us go through that in taking each other for granted.
Now, all of us do.
Yeah.
All of us who have been married for more than 6 months or are back from the honeymoon, I mean, if it be a vacation type honeymoon or whatever, or the proverbial honeymoon. Elaine, in my case, it lasted 3 years. Our honeymoon lasted a little over 3 years. So anytime after the honeymoon, every spouse takes for granted. Is that how you say it? Granted?
Yeah.
All right. It's not granted.
Takes for
Please say
granted.
granted. In other words,
That's another way of putting it. Follow it.
Yeah. This degree of familiarity, it may or may not be outright verbal abuse.
Mm-hmm.
If, for instance, I say to Elaine, yeah, I love you, I mean, she might experience that as actual verbal abuse. How dare you say the sentence, I love you, and not mean it?
Yeah.
That's the same as calling me a name. And then the usual things like the answer, yeah, instead of, okay, honey, or sweetheart, or darling, or Elaine, or okay, Elaine. So you can emphatically say, okay, Elaine, and not have it as nasty as, okay, sweetheart.
Yeah.
Very subtle little things that over a long period of time become verbal abuse. With a stranger, for a newfound friend, first you haven't had the time to get so ordinary and familiar that you can be emphatic and they will instantly forgive you, as opposed to a spouse, the long-term relationship, where you're searching for an excuse to say, there you go again, or the sword fighting, the need for sword fighting, as I call it. Of course, be cautious of a newfound relationship that you may be supplementing that which you really should be correcting in your spousal relationship. Along with just the fact that, let's be honest, and I mean, I'm claiming this, let's be honest, there are many fish in the sea. You have the ability to fall in love with more than one person. I didn't think that prior to my near-death experience. I honestly and truthfully did not think that. I thought,
believed in the knight in shining armor.
well,
myth, or the one princess, one prince.
right. I thought that there was
Born again.
one person for each person. This doesn't really affect this whole deal about soulmates, but if you want to include that, it would be that you have a soulmate. And even regarding that, if you want to use that phrase, and I'm not that familiar with it, but a soulmate, even a soulmate, there's more than one, depending on your long-term interpretation of a soulmate. In other words, that there are more intimate and loving relationships with everybody. If you know it or not, or if you've ever had an experience toward that or not, that doesn't matter. I'm claiming that there are more loves for each person than a singular. There may very well be a singular only, but there's usually the capacity for any one of us to be as much in love as we've ever been with an additional or another individual in a single lifetime.
So the maturity in that situation is to not automatically throw out the old soulmate for the new soulmate, but to look for the value in what you already have rather than to just...
Yeah, this whole thing can be very, very trying and very, very difficult. And as I've said, most near-death experiencers, intensive near-death experiencers, who have a profound spiritual awakening, become separated and divorced. So, I mean, the statistics speak for itself as far as this is not just a caution that I'm trying to share with you.
It's a reality.
This is a very trying and traumatic, usually, and dramatic reality.
And what happens is that all the children that get involved in all of these switchings around or whatever. We have a family in our hometown where the ex-husband and wife bought a duplex, remarried, and they've got new children and shared children. I mean, if you can do that, that's beautiful because they haven't lost the parents. But in most cases, there's so much pain involved.
One quick statement, which I just want to quick yell this out, is that in any separation of any form, of any kind, I don't care if you're in separate bedrooms within the household, two spouses, or if you have separated voluntarily or separated legally or divorced, any form of separation or, well, I still love your father and I'm living with him, but I want you to know that I'm in love with somebody else. Now, we are going to stay together for you children. And scenarios such as that, the example you gave, where there are two families living side by side and they have switch wives or whatever scenario it is, there is a tremendous amount of responsibility that I very rarely see recognized by people who do that. In other words, have accomplished that or do that. And that one of the examples or one of the things that I want to point out is if there are children involved, they are traumatized by the scenario. They're traumatized by the scenario as it developed. They're traumatized and affected forever after in their life. Regardless of how lovey-dovey you think it turns out or how positive or nice, they are traumatized and they are affected for life. I have heard so often people say, they're young, they'll adjust. And I want to say, bullshit. They're young and they will adjust, but they will not adjust to what you're thinking they will adjust. And they will not be normal. They will not be usual. They will be different. They will be new and not necessarily as well off. Now, I'm not saying that nobody should ever separate. I'm not saying that. There are circumstances where it is a necessity. There are circumstances where it just can't work any other way. And we've tried for 15 years to patch this up, all the sentences and so on. And in spite of the realization that you children are going to be hurt and traumatized and it's going to last your entire life, that we separate, we have ourselves to think of as well as you, and the balance of all this knowledge says that it's going to be best that we separate.
That you can love them
separately
than together.
Right, I'm not saying that it cannot be justified.
Right.
Situations like that can be justified, but don't deceive yourself or be deceived by people that there is not that horrendously traumatic effect on not just children, but casual acquaintances and friends, the families, and the plural families involved, and of course, especially children, regardless of how old the children are. I don't care if they're still in diapers or if they're 21 years old and have been through 2 divorces themselves. If their elderly parents divorce, it affects those children, regardless of their age or situation. A lot of people deceive themselves, and they go through situations like that, not knowing that there will be that. Minor examples is that the young daughter will hate the mother for leaving daddy. The young daughter will hate mommy for doing this and leaving her or bringing her with them. And vice versa. The gender doesn't matter. There is a tendency, which I know psychologically speaking, that the daughter will hate mommy because of what she did to daddy, even if legally, I'm emphasizing this, legally, daddy did the bad thing to create the scenario. If daddy is a physical abuser, if daddy has had extramarital affairs, which is intolerable to the female spouse, and the female spouse files for divorce because of illegitimate or all that sort of stuff, the young daughter will probably still blame mommy for the separation. Mommy instituted a bad thing.
You know what comes to mind, though, for me is that back when we were children and our parents really tried to present their marriage as perfect, and they never let you see them argue, and then you go into your marriage thinking it's not correct to argue, and you think your marriage is falling apart because it wasn't like your mom's and dad's. You know, there's got to be sort of a balance there between letting your children think that relationships don't have to be worked on to continue, and yet letting them see so much of the pain that they'll never even want to get married.
Generally, we also have to consider in this statement generations, because our generation, meaning anywhere from 30 to 45-year-olds, right? Meaning the end of World War II. We were born the end of World War II.
Yeah.
From the baby boomers onwardly, there is no longer the necessity for two people to stay married. In other words, financially, therefore economically, physically, and socially. In other words, a person who was divorced in 1945 was shunned socially. Oh, that's the divorced person. Don't talk to her or him. Right? I mean, socially, in other words, in large circles, that person will be shunned. The necessity for physically speaking, in other words, I am married to you, you will take care of me, I will take care of you. There's no longer that need. If I need surgery, I don't need my wife Elaine to take care of me. There is the ambulance service, there is the social workers, there is the hospital, there is daycare, there is assistance, there is all kinds of things. I'm not saying it's correct, it's not the best scenario, but the word need, I don't need anybody. Our society is so well developed, communications, transportation, and so on, you don't need a partner to climb the mountain. You don't need the partner to move to California. I mean, two people can survive in a sleeping bag at sub-zero temperature. But we don't need sleeping bags. We have tents and Coleman lanterns and sufficient sleeping bags that you can survive alone nowadays. Right? Going through a bunch of stuff to saying our parents needed each other. And the probability of their surviving, I'm talking death, physical death, as well as psychological deprivation. There is enough entertainment today that we can play a psychological head game saying, oh, I'm happy today. What did you do today? I watched television today. Did you take any time to think of your spouse who you left in Buffalo? No, I haven't had the time. Doesn't mean that it didn't exist, but on a conscious level, you can be entertained enough to cope for long periods of time. Conceivably, getting toward more comfort of separation and divorce and a forgetfulness of responsibility and in other words, a lost relationship and so on. You can fill in your time by shunning all of that, right? What I'm stating and advocating more is, of course, the caution to have to go through a scenario like that, God forbid a separation and divorce, is never truly fun or pleasant. It's always losing. Somebody loses something. It's not a good thing. It's generally a bad thing. And the preciousness of the old relationships. A lot of times we say, let's go to Sedona, Arizona, or let's have a conference, or let's go on television. Instead of saying, let's sit across the room from each other, set the alarm clock, and not speak a word to each other. We can focus on each other. We might even smile or wink, or you can eliminate that. But stay in the same room with each other for 1 hour a day, what an investment. It might not even be fun the first hour, the first time you do it, but what an investment. Like you say, it cost me $30,000 to get this last divorce. Imagine if you put $30,000 into, and I'm not advocating any one of these, but counseling, a third or fourth honeymoon, a purchase of many books, articles, go visit friends that you don't normally visit, talk to other people, seek religious counseling. In other words, $30,000 worth of investment into cure
on the relationship
is not, that's an extraordinary amount of money. And if you invested that much time equals money, in other words, if you say that if we spend 5 months trying to get together and solve our social problems, that's not a lot of time compared to a lifetime. And the cost of that is minimal compared to the cost of guaranteed a divorce. So, little things like that people, it's so simple that they forget about that. They get all wrapped up in their own thing or the sword fighting and, yeah, well, if you do this to me, I'll tell you one thing, you won't get this house, I'll burn it down. And they're so focusing on that sort of thing, or, well, go ahead because I'll get the house and all the finances and you will have to support me. And what are you saying? Are you saying, well, go ahead, that'll make me happy? Or now, if you do that and you have to support me, then we'll both be happy? They're forgetting the very basic thing that situation that create. Now, back focusing on the relationships and spiritually speaking, it is okay to love as unconditionally as you want to imagine to a newfound friend or a stranger, being a married person. I have been in that circumstances thousands of times. For me personally, I have been fortunate. I'm saying it like that because I don't want to lay full claim to it. And the same token I do want to state for somebody who doesn't know me that well is that I have been automatically or culturally conditioned to a very high degree of fervently faithful, sexually pure, if you will. And don't get hung up on any of these singular words, but because what I'm really saying is that it's been natural for me compared to a socially acceptable learned thing, or I read the psychology book, or I've read all the New York State laws. As opposed to that, this has come more natural for me. So I don't want to compare myself to anybody else because I know most other people have a much more difficult time dealing with should I become less, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Or what? Not being monogamous, you mean?
Oh, right. Because toward that, in other words, should I remain monogamous or not? Or in the moment of passion and or romance, might be a one-night thing or hit you in less than 15 minutes. And I know about that, and I've experienced about to that degree. But I guess I'm a good manipulator because I've been able to turn that around toward a little more unconditional or outright take my physical hands and stop and just say, I'm sorry. In other words, I'm able to say no.
Yeah.
Just say no. I've been able to do that on several occasions, I can brag and say. But seriously, been able to say no. Many people can't. And I understand that. So when scenarios like that develop, what to focus on the short-term effect, and then maybe more importantly, the long-term effect. And what is it that your job is? Like Elaine yelled out and said, if you're going to be so unconditional and promote love and love and love, don't deny your spouse and where you're supposed to be right here, right now. Get that squared away. No, go home and clean your house. I said that to a dear friend of mine, and he understood what I meant threefold. I meant his house was in disarray, his physical house, and it needed straightening up and cleaning. I even offered a backhoe to help. I meant go clean your house. Now, you get off the sofa and start moving around and clean your house. But like the house of David in the Bible, I meant clean your house. Now, clean your own family up before you neglect and shun and throw away and go off and try to promote this new and wonderful, cleansed, and more pure and lovey-dovey situation. And a third way, which I won't even bother to go into. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, 50.
Okay. Did you want to lead me into another thing, or should I?
Yeah, well, I think you covered it, except that I know you told me one time, fairly recently, that in having a deep and caring relationship with someone, you have 95% of the wonderful part of it without taking that last step and blowing your marriage, their marriage, whatever, out of the water. You don't really need that because you already have what's really most important, and you still all respect each other's commitment. And then you don't lose the friend either.
Yeah, that's not so easily done than said. Much easier said than done. Yeah, I don't know really how to respond to that right away.
It's to keep your friendships or your caring about people proper.
See, one of my problems is it's been so easy, and I've been able to do that. And I know as an example that Elaine has, I can say she has a hang up with regarding certain relationships that I have been involved in recently, and she says, no, nothing should exist. In other words, you should have no relationship at all with this person because of the close call.
Oh, right.
In other words, that's the insurance policy, and there's security for Elaine in that. And that's understandable, and that's often the safest way.
Right.
And she can't truly perceive that either I do have the capacity for dealing with that, and that this new, more unconditional love that I at least claim, I need to say it like that, I at least claim, that there is enough power in that to supersede or override the probability of me giving into romantically or sexually or that which would be socially unacceptable to Elaine and my spousal relationship. That would jeopardize that. And yet, so often, in fact, I even dare say a majority of everybody we're talking to has found themselves in a circumstance like that and have not only had a difficult time, but have said, yeah, but now that you've said all of that, it is just so much better, and that I would prefer all of the trade-offs and not wish to give up this new relationship. And even if it means to the point that if my spouse can't handle the new me, then that is not necessarily my fault, or that it will be better for all of us, and certainly better for me, to go with this more comfortable, easier, or newfound relationship. And I mean, that's not, it's a true statement. And it is easier. And one of the things that we, so-called spiritually oriented people, have to think a lot about and decide is that should it ever be the easier way out? And that what is our real job? I mean, should we ever neglect or shun or throw away any of our baggage?
And where are our priorities and what's important?
Well, of course, on an ongoing basis, in other words, here's a new development. Well, does this fit into my main priority? And then then each stage of the way. What are your immediate priorities? What is your long range goals? Will it hamper that? Will it fit into that? Now, see, that's all logical deductive reasoning, because we're bordering on and talking about romance. And as I said, don't ever make an assumption, spiritually speaking. Don't ever make an assumption or use logical deductive reasoning when you're talking about romance or sexual activity. By that I mean those sexual either arousal or activity, because where is your conscience, or where is your logical deductive reasoning when you're involved in those emotions or physical states of mind? And I mean not only physical states of mind, but a state of mind that creates physical sensations that you are out of control. with your other faculties. And it's kind of sounds awfully intellectual, but I think you understand.
Yeah, I know in the first taping you said something about there's no such thing as unconditional love, not even a mother for a child. But in this case, like you almost can't say that unconditional love and romantic love can be.
They're not compared at all, right?
No.
They're not the same thing. You cannot unconditionally
Love
have
somebody.
romantic, right? You can't have unconditional romantic love.
Uh-huh.
The word romantic love disqualifies unconditional love and focuses on one little aspect of an expression of love. Those you can have sexual love, which is one of the worst forms of love compared to unconditional love, because it is so conditional and it is so emotional, and with that, usually physically stimulating, or in those effective at least, that other faculties are totally disoriented or completely out of focus. In other words, can you be intellectual in an orgasm or in a state of ecstasy, romantically speaking? In other words, you can be romantically in love with a sunset. And how well do you think you're going to do math? If you think so, go to the seashore with a paper and pencil. I mean, try this. Rather than a screw up a relationship, try it with one sunset. There'll be many other sunsets, and you will in your life review will have lost that one sunset, but try it. And then you really allow yourself to fall in love with romantic love, if you can, distort this in the scenario, fall in love with the sunset, and then like halfway through it, like the sun is halfway, behind the water, okay? And then force yourself, even have a little alarm clock and time it so that the alarm clock goes off and then quickly go down and do some involved math. I promise you won't be that mechanical. And that's what I'm saying, regarding this, and it affects us in such a way that just don't expect. Now, one of our problems is that we have relationships, yours and mine and so on, where there is such dis-ease in aspects of our relationship that it is just so refreshing and comfortable to be alleviated of that state of dis-ease or that problem, and that if this other person shows no signs of that problem, that we can be attracted and overwhelmed by this other individual. And it can even be, in my case, it can be a group of people. I mean, do I experience form of ego in a large group of people? Well, you're damned right I do. I mean, I have to.
Yeah.
I have to. It's natural. And then is that enough to say, well, I know we had this weekend planned, Elaine, but I have a chance to talk to 10,000 people at one time. And thank God, if it be important enough, I will say, well, I'm sorry, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for these 10,000 people for me to talk to. Mm-hmm. But, I have to focus my energies and so on to and with Elaine for that weekend.
I'm going to turn on this light so that we can wrap up with the final question.
Okay, and turn that switch over there, too. A little more light, because we're speaking of sunsets.
Yeah. Why don't we close with you sharing with people about the unconditional love in connection with the Berlin Wall. In 4 minutes.
Oh, yeah, 3 or 4 minutes. My goodness. Yeah, well, I said a while ago, and I don't remember the verbatim what I said, but I was giving an analogy, and I said, well, let me give you an example, because it was just prior to what developed with the recognition that the Berlin Wall was no longer apropos, and it started to come down, and it's continuing to do so, thank God. I said, well, let me give you an example. How many army tanks would it take to obliterate the entire Berlin Wall? Physically impossible. There are not that many army tanks, and it cannot physically be done. If you lined them all up side by side, and they all fired at the same time and emptied their caches of arms, there would still be this rubble, and the wall would still be there. Okay? And even if the tanks stayed there for 5 months doing that day after day after day till their barrels melted down, the wall and the rubble and the symbolic gesture would still be there. An attitudinal change of a group of people or many people, or a realization attitudinally that this is no longer acceptable. And what took place? People brought roses. And instead of army tanks, they brought roses. They climbed on the wall and handed them to the guards that a month before would have machine gunned them to death. An attitudinal change says, this is no longer religiously, socially, or politically acceptable. And what is this? Let's stop this. The wall is coming down. I mean, symbolically, this is the new age. This is what we're preaching about. This is what we're striving for. Attitudinal change is more powerful than an atomic bomb, and a nuclear holocaust, than arms and stuff like this. There's still currently a need for some of that stuff during the transition. But this is what we're striving for. Relationships, attitudinal changes. You and most of you viewing this have already had or are into attitudinal changes, spiritually speaking. Strive, take time, spend money, effort of showing and teaching your spouse and your close friends that they have the ability, first of all, of changing their attitude. Don't say you have a bad attitude or you have an attitude as the teenagers do, because that's confrontational. But show them that an attitudinal change is better. Let's be that example, if you will, kind of philosophically speaking. Be that example. And with attitudinal change will become the reality. And of course, as something is better and better and better, try to promulgate it that way. It's 11 years from my near-death experience, and I'm fervently, fanatically at times, striving for this with Elaine. I get her angry at me. She woke up 2 mornings ago, I believe it was. She says, I don't want to be philosophized to. And in spite of that request, I still did for about 15 minutes. I mean, did that aggravate her? Did that help her? What was the trade-off? Well, in hindsight, I'm not totally sorry that I did it anyway, that I spoke about one particular aspect or one thing, because it's almost uncontrollable to me that I can't give that up. I mean, with everything that I know and that I've learned, I have to keep trying. I'm not obsessive about it. Well, again, that's argumentative in itself. But I mean, I realize that I may fail. It's not an ultimate challenge for me. And yet I may be contradicting myself because I make it a priority. So it is a challenge. And I want this. I wish this. And even if I'm never satisfied by my measurements, by my judgmental statements as to how much I've been able to show, share, and teach my wife Elaine, and she, of course, ongoing is doing that to and for me. I mean, I'm receiving every bit as much from her as I can from her, especially the fact that day after day, I need more, and I have to do more. But again, the focus, the attitudinal change, and so on, and you can apply that with everything. What do you think? Thank you. Namaste.